Dawn broke over the cobbled square of what passed for a town in these unsettled seed-time months. It was not the gentle, fragrant dawn of late blossom, heavy with the scent of ripe fruit, but a sharper, more hopeful light characteristic of mid-seed time, the sun high enough to promise warmth, yet the earth still demanding constant, anxious tending. The light possessed a pale gold quality, slanting across the hastily repaired fences, maintenance from the harsh winter finally catching up, illuminating the promise of the emerging wheat fields. Alden or Ashler, whose natural beauty seemed only sharpened by the cool morning air, was likely already rehearsing a difficult arpeggio on his lute, his introspection battling the demands of the performing life. Jareth Baladin, ever the observer behind his dazzling smile, would be supervising the stabling of their hired nags, calculating the cost against the potential local patronage. Corvus, restless even in repose, might be examining the stitching on his velvet doublet, already bored with the provincial pace. Lucian Whisperwind, perhaps, was merely admiring his reflection in a polished piece of silver, already cataloguing the weaknesses of the local populace. Valerius Thorn, cynical as always, was likely ensuring their meager supply wagons were properly stocked, perhaps trading a sharp word with a passing tinker, one of the itinerants now roaming the revitalized roads. Their small troupe, a collection of beautiful, dangerous artists, were trying to settle into a routine, one that involved exchanging a few rousing songs for sturdy lodging and whatever the local market offered before moving on to grander stages. This particular morning, however, the usual bustle of early agricultural toil, the sound of hoes turning the damp soil for cabbages and peas, was muted, replaced by a thick, almost viscous silence. It was into this unnatural quiet, just as the dew was burning off the thatched roofs, that the desperate hammering commenced upon the sturdy oak doors of their rented establishment. A figure burst through the doorway, a youth whose face was streaked with soot and terror, clearly a runner sent from somewhere distant. He was breathless, stumbling over the threshold as if the very air was resisting his passage. Vanya Stormbright, ever quick to note human distress, would have already shifted her posture, her quiet observation turning sharp, ready to gauge the threat or opportunity presented. Brock Stonebraid, the dwarf mercenary, whose loyalty was as solid as the iron in his homeland, would have already moved, hand near the pommel of his great axe, his professional instincts overriding any lingering grogginess. Gillian Hawthorne, perhaps visiting the town healer, a necessary stop for anyone in a rough trade, would recognize the signs of true desperation. The messenger, gasping like a landed fish, pointed a trembling finger toward the north. Silverstream, by the gods, help us! The river, the azure flow, it stopped. It just ceased. The curse, it's upon us. Everything is dying. The gravity of the drought, hitting in seed time when every drop was vital for the new plantings and the fruit trees still heavy with their spring bloom, struck the entertainers like a physical blow. Aldenor, his practiced charm momentarily faltering, saw the genuine panic, a raw emotion he sometimes sought to capture, but never to witness so acutely. Jareth's calculating gaze softened marginally. The man understood the necessity of reputation. A quick rescue now meant future patronage and perhaps even tales worth weaving. Corvus, ever ambitious, saw an epic scenario unfolding, a perfect backdrop for drama. Lucian, eyes gleaming with cold curiosity, simply wanted to know why a river would halt. The desperate plea was offered: aid for the village of Silverstream, a community now facing desiccation because their lifeblood, the river, had been stolen away. The entertainers, their performance interrupted by the harsh reality of crisis, conferred briefly, the decision swift. They agreed to investigate. The roads were open, the season demanded movement, and a trapped river spirit sounded like a magnificent, if slightly damp, adventure. With the messenger calmed enough to give basic directions, the troop prepared to trade their instruments for travel-worn cloaks and the grim necessity of the road, the sickly sweet perfume of the fruit blossoms suddenly tasting like ash in the air. The departure from town was swift, lacking the usual theatrical flair. Brock ensured the necessary rations, preserved meats and dried root vegetables unearthed from the tail end of winter storage, were secure. Ellsworth honeysuckle, perhaps having just finished selling a particularly fine batch of woven wares at the local seed fair, might have offered a genuinely concerned look, her ingrained sense of community touched by the plight of a fellow settlement. Aldenor mounted his horse with an almost painful grace, the thought of failing the populace grating against his desire for their adoration. Jareth rode beside him, quieter than usual, perhaps composing a mournful ballad in his head for the withered crops. The journey itself mirrored the affliction of Silverstream. The weather, though blessedly sunny, the glorious, increasingly warm sunlight of seed time, seemed to mop the dryness below. The roads, usually improving now that the heavy thaw was past and merchants were making their rounds, felt hollow. The air, instead of carrying the vibrant smells of newly sown glimmerseed or the intense perfume of the orchards in full glory, held only the scent of dust and desiccated grass. It took the better part of 2 days of hard riding, the rhythmic clop of hooves being the only constant sound against the oppressive silence of the landscape, before they reached Silverstream. The village was a portrait of slow-motion disaster. Houses looked slumped, their window boxes stripped bare. The villagers moved like figures in a poorly acted tragedy, their faces etched with fear and the initial stages of dehydration. Their eyes, dark and sunken, fixed upon the newcomers, the colorful, seemingly frivolous entertainers, with a desperate, almost embarrassing hope. They were weakened, the communal labor paused, the vital planting postponed indefinitely. It was here they learned of Alara, the old hermit, dwelling somewhere along the impossibly dry bed of what should have been the Azureflow River. Lucian, ever the adept at gathering whispered truths, quickly ascertained that the villagers viewed Alara with the usual mixture of suspicion and reliance reserved for those who live outside the structured life of the community. Valerius, employing a practiced, soothing tone honed from placating angry lords after a poorly received satire, managed to coax the necessary directions from the local elder. The walk to Alara's cottage took the better part of the next morning. The riverbed was a shocking spectacle, cracked, pale mud stretching out like the hide of a long-dead leviathan. The sun beat down mercilessly upon this scar, emphasizing the absence of life. Alara's cottage, built of river stones and overgrown with tenacious, desperate ivy, sat like a stubborn tooth in the jawbone of the dry earth. Alara herself was a study in resilience, her face a roadmap of years spent in solitude. When Corvus attempted a charming, slightly overdramatic inquiry, she cut him short with a glare that spoke volumes of her impatience with surface distractions. She spoke plainly, her voice dry as the river stones. Curses are not born of thin air, young man. This is focused malice. She spoke of a dark, oily crystal, pulsing with malevolence, lodged deep in the water source, holding the very essence of the river spirit captive. Her finger stabbed toward the west. Malachor, the disgraced fool, fled to the sunken marshes years ago. If you wish the water to flow before your crops turn entirely to dust, you must go there. But the marshes demand payment before passage. 3 seals must be broken before his lair in the crumbling tower opens to you. With that pronouncement, she offered them stale bread and bitter tea, a sparse meal that Valerius grudgingly accepted. The entertainers turned west, the knowledge of their destination, a wretched, fog-choked swamp, settling heavily upon him as the afternoon wore on, the sun beginning its slow, deliberate descent, painting the plains in hues of bruised purple and fading orange. The quest was now clear, and the path decidedly unpleasant. The journey to the edge of the sunken marshes was a grinding affair spanning the next day and a half. This was not the pleasant traversal of well-traveled roads where tinkers might set up shop or healers offer poultices. This was wilderness reclaiming its own. The group pushed hard, their initial hopeful energy gradually eroded by the oppressive humidity that began to press in even before they reached the bog proper. Brock, naturally suited to rougher terrain, took point, his warrior's senses tuned to the slightest indication of hidden pathways or lurking threats. Aldenor found the increasing grime and dampness a personal affront, his exquisite silks threatening to mold, forcing him to rely more on his inherent charisma than his visual appeal. They reached the periphery of the swamp late on the third day, the transition marked by the sudden, choking smell of stagnant water and decaying vegetation, a stark contrast to the fresh, flowery air they had left behind. The sun struggled to penetrate the thick, humid haze that clung to the marshlands, filtering the light into a sickly, greenish gloom that made every shadow seem suspicious. Vanya, however, seemed more energized here, the cover of the thicket and fog appealing to her roguish nature. She moved with unnerving silence, occasionally pointing out trip routes or patches of quicksand that could swallow a horse whole. The first seal, according to Alara's cryptic instructions relayed via hastily scribbled notes, was near a specific, massive, gnarled willow at the swamp's entrance. To reach it, they had to hack their way through dense reeds and navigate pools of water the color of old copper. And there, resting near the willow like a grotesque, moss-covered sentinel, was the guardian, a swamp troll, larger than any they had encountered, its skin thick with hardened mud and its eyes small, porcine beads of malice. It rose with a groan that seemed to vibrate the very waterlogged ground. The combat was not elegant, it was desperate and messy, a stark departure from the staged duels Aldenor and Jareth occasionally sparred in. The troll was immensely strong, its blows capable of snapping lesser wood. Brock met the first charge head-on, the impact jarring him back a full yard, his armor protesting loudly. He managed to anchor himself, utilizing his warrior training to weather the storm, but the troll's massive, club-like fists were relentless. Lucian, employing his surprising warrior skills, darted in, a silver dagger flashing against the troll's thick hide, scoring superficial, maddening wounds. The troll roared, its attention momentarily diverted to the darting annoyance. Corvus, usually preferring the manipulation of words, found himself resorting to the primal fear of his audience's disapproval. He used his agility, honed by years of stagecraft, to keep just out of reach, flinging insults crafted with the precision of a master courtier, aiming not at the beast's hide, but at its dwindling patience. Jareth, drawing a serviceable short sword, moved with the focused intensity of a man aiming for the perfect dramatic climax. He sought weaknesses, finding purchase where the troll's joints met its muddy bulk. The fighting was brutal. A misplaced swing from the troll caught Valerius across the ribs, sending him sprawling into the muck, his cynicism momentarily replaced by sharp, gasping pain. Even Brock took a glancing blow that cracked his vambrace, drawing a thick bead of blood that mingled with the swamp water. Gillian Hawthorne's apprentice skills in herbalism proved invaluable. Even on the move, she managed to quickly apply a rudimentary poultice to Valerius's injury using marsh herbs she recognized, a small mercy in the chaos. It was a sustained, brutal effort. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of clashing steel and grunts of exertion, Brock found an opening created by Lucian's persistent distractions. He swung his axe, channeling the strength of his clan, driving the honed edge deep into the troll's neck where the thick hide was thinnest. With a sickening, wet collapse, the beast fell. It was a victory bought dearly, with many members of the group wounded, weary, and smeared with foulness. Near the troll's slack, massive hand lay the first required artifact, the Seal of Earth, a rough disk of petrified wood and quartz, still faintly vibrating with the brute force it had witnessed. They claimed it, the heavy weight of it a tangible reward for the dispirited fight, and retreated slightly from the immediate scene to tend to their wounds, the swamp air thick with the smell of troll blood and damp earth. They spent a fitful night near the marsh's edge, the sounds of the bog, the croaking, the slithering, the distant, echoing cries, making sleep a fitful, shallow affair. Brock, despite his wounds, took the first watch, his dwarf stamina holding firm against the unsettling ambience. The dawn that broke on the fourth day was a watery, filtered affair, the sun trying valiantly to burn off the marsh mist, achieving only a frustrating, lukewarm humidity. After a meager breakfast of hardtack and slightly bruised, stored root vegetables, a poor substitute for the fresh greens promised by the height of seed time, they moved on, tracking the location of the second seal. Alara had indicated a hidden grove deeper within the slightly elevated forest bordering the swamp, a place the troll's domain had not yet fully corrupted. The journey inward was a study in contrasts. They transitioned from the fetid lowlands to higher ground where the air, while still thick, carried faint whispers of pine and damp moss. This section required deep focus, with Lucian and Vanya scouting ahead, their skills in observation proving more vital than any brute force. They found the grove not by sight, but by the sudden, profound silence of the forest, as if the ambient sounds of insects and birds had been voluntarily suspended. In the heart of this sanctuary stood the guardian of the seal of wood, an ancient tree ant, its bark furrowed with millennia of growth rings, its presence radiating an immense, quiet wisdom that dwarfed the entertainer's own cultivated charms. Corvus, sensing the shift from mere combat to philosophical challenge, stepped forward, attempting to engage the ancient being with the measured eloquence he reserved for kings. The tree ant, however, merely rustled its leaves, a sound like 1,000 turning pages. The seal serves stability. To pass, you must prove you understand the nature of growth, not just applause. It posed a riddle, its voice deep, like stones grinding beneath a glacier. I am sown in hope. I drink the rain. I stand tallest when I serve the many, and I bow lowest before the winter's pain. What am I? Aldenor, often lost in the melancholy of self-reflection, paused, considering the ephemeral nature of performance versus the deep roots of life. Jareth, surprisingly, offered the insight. It is not a thing, but an act. A promise. Valerius, ever the cynic, muttered something about the difficulty of bowing low enough, but it was Ellsworth, perhaps understanding the agricultural context best, who spoke with quiet certainty. It is the crop, or the seed. The tree ant responded with a slow, deliberate nod. The seed requires the promise. You understand the patience of seed time. With a low creak, the immense branches shifted, revealing the second seal, the seal of wood, intricately carved from living, dark heartwood. The tree ant offered a slow, formal blessing upon their continuing endeavors, wishing them well on their path toward renewal, before settling back into its millennia-long vigil. The third seal led him up, a difficult ascent from the swamp's embrace toward a series of rocky, wind-swept hills, a stark, almost barren landscape that felt strangely freeing after the suffocating marsh. This required hard travel, scrambling over scree and exposed rock faces, testing Brock's dwarven, sure-footedness and forcing even the agile entertainers to rely on raw physical stamina rather than illusion. They established a camp for the night on a high plateau, the air thin and clear, a vast improvement over the swamp, though the chill of night settled deep into their bones. The following dawn, the first true, bright sunlight they had felt in days washed over them, feeling like a physical cleansing. Near the summit, nestled in a surprisingly vibrant patch of spring heather, they located the sprite's domain, a scattering of miniature, impossibly delicate dwellings woven into the granite. The clan of mischievous sprites immediately materialized, tiny, buzzing entities of pure chaos, demanding satisfaction before yielding their prize, the seal of air. They wouldn't accept coin or charm. They demanded a playful challenge, a contest of wit and speed, echoing the light-hearted chaos of the high spring festivals. The sprites, appeased by Vanya's surprising agility in a game of tag woven with illusionary light, a performance that momentarily captivated Lucian's dark curiosity, relinquished the seal of air, a shimmering piece of crystallized wind. With all three anchors, earth, wood, and air, now in hand, the group retreated to a relatively safe, flat expanse of ground just outside the true moor of the sunken marshes. Corvus, eager to deploy his arcane knowledge, oversaw the ritual. The three seals were placed upon a simple obsidian slab they'd carried, and a complex convergence of protective enchantments, woven by Aldenor's performance magic blending with a few precise, spoken invocations from Jareth, was enacted. The air crackled, the combined energies binding together, creating a visible tether of force that pointed directly into the deepest, most impenetrable region of the marsh. This power was the key. The combination formed a temporary pathway past the natural barriers Malachor had erected. Re-entering the marsh, guided by the glowing seals, was like swimming through cold water. The fog was thicker now, a suffocating, disorienting maze designed to trap and exhaust the unwary. Valerius, relying on his keen sense of direction, kept them moving along the invisible line of power. They moved slowly, every sound amplified, every misplaced step potentially fatal. Finally, the fog parted to reveal the centerpiece of Malachor's villainy, a crumbling, black tower, seemingly built from fused swamp debris and dark magic, rising incongruously from the mire. It looked like a skeletal finger pointing accusingly at the sky. They forced entry. The interior was choked with arcane residue and the faint, sickly sweet odor of corrupted life force. In the highest accessible chamber, they found Malachor. He stood before a dais upon which rested the object of his theft, the dark crystal, massive and obsidian, its surface laced with glowing, captured energy, clearly siphoning the very essence of the azure flow spirit. Malachor, eyes burning with mad ambition, turned, his voice a grating parody of command. He recognized the entertainers, or perhaps only the threat they represented to his stolen power, and immediately unleashed a torrent of necrotic energy whipping across the room. The final battle was a desperate melee fought in a chamber where the very air felt sick. Brock and Lucian formed the front line, the combined skills, Brock's raw warrior might, Lucian's unexpected knack for close combat, holding the wizard's direct assault at bay. Jareth and Aldenor worked in concert, their troubadour skills turned weaponized. They unleashed sonic blasts disguised as high, piercing notes, disrupting Malachor's concentration. Corvus, using his courtier skills to anticipate the wizard's tactical shifts, called out warnings and redirected their attacks. It was a dance of survival. Jillian, utilizing her healer skills, kept Brock and Valerius patched up with quick, emergency salves made from carefully preserved winter herbs, her presence a quiet anchor of pragmatic survival. The climax arrived when Aldenor, channeling a desperate surge of sympathetic magic, struck a resonant, agonizing chord on his lute that momentarily stunned the wizard. That was all the opening they needed. Brock charged, ignoring the backlash of dark energy, and swung his axe not at the wizard, but with shattering force against the massive dark crystal. The sound was deafening, not of breaking stone, but of profound release. The crystal exploded into harmless shards. A shimmering wave of pure, vital water energy washed outward, pushing the darkness from the room. Malachor shrieked, his stolen power gone, collapsing into dust that the sudden infusion of magical humidity quickly dissolved into muck. Then, she appeared, the river spirit, manifesting as a radiant, ethereal naiad, shimmering with the promise of the deep currents. She hovered for a moment, the light returning to the tower, bathing the exhausted heroes in revitalizing energy. She bowed her head to them, a gesture of profound gratitude, before dissolving into the air, rushing back toward her prison. The curse was broken. The journey back to Silverstream was swift, aided by the return of life to the land. By the time they reached the village, the sound of rushing water was audible. The azure flow was singing again, life-giving and strong, washing away the dust of the terrible week. The villagers emerged, weeping openly as the first healthy sprouts of cabbage and peas in their fields visibly straightened. The messenger, tears of joy replacing those of terror, presented them not just with coin, but with the finest remaining stored root vegetables and jugs of potent, home-brewed cider, celebrating their saviors as the true heroes of the season's renewal. The entertainers, weary but satisfied, had secured not just coin, but a legend, a far grander performance than any stage could offer.